Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, and with me is Dr. Don Preston. How are you doing today?
I'm here. I'm present and accounted for. Or
well, good.
Some would say there's no accounting for me, but that's another issue.
All right. Well, it's good to be back with you. And sorry we got a little mix-up on last week, but everything is good today. And I hope you're doing well. Of course, we were having a little conversation beforehand, so I know you've got a little challenge there going on. But nevertheless, I'll be praying that everything's okay. Weather
Appreciate
here
that.
has been a little bit overcast and wet for the last couple of days, but seems like it might be drying out. We may get some sunshine on tomorrow, but then I heard from my contractor today, and he said it's going to be raining all day tomorrow, so I don't know how it's going to turn out. At any rate, how's things out in the way of Ardmore, Oklahoma?
Yesterday and today both have been, they've just been the kind of day, temperature-wise, it hasn't been cold, but it's just been a kind of temperature, and it may be with the other stuff that's kind of going on with me. It just cuts through you. It just chills you to the bone. I've actually felt like I had fever a couple of different times because I was chilling. And it's not like it was 20 degrees or nothing, But anyway, it's just dull, dreary, no sunshine. And, boy, that kind of weather gets to me really badly. If you'll remember, William, up in Ohio where we used to speak every year, they'll go 30, 45 days without seeing the sun at all. And people just walking around, with their heads down and drooping. And you let the sun peek through for just a little while, and they're almost dancing in the streets. And, boy, I don't think I could take that. I've got to have some sunshine. That's all there is to it. We haven't had sunshine. Let's see, this is Tuesday. We haven't had sunshine since Saturday afternoon, I guess. And so just in that short period of time, it's just it's kind of depressing. But it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's really, really great to have sunshine, and because it brightens your day, warms you up a little bit, and especially during the winter months, and then just kind of keeps your mind and your attitude in a positive manner. The weather doesn't get me down too much. I don't know why I don't allow it to bother me as much, unless it's just ongoing. But a couple of days or whatever, doesn't bother me, and so I'm grateful for that. I'll tell you what, you don't have a problem with the sun in Africa, man. It's burning hot all day long, bright as it can be. So there's a place that doesn't have any sun problem in terms of it's not shining for the most part.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. Okay. Well, I'm just sitting here trying to think about, some of the things that have been going on. I think I made the announcement. Yes, I did, about being contacted by a gentleman. He's just finishing up his doctoral degree pardon me, if I remember correctly, he's finishing a degree in theology. And he had just recently discovered my videos on YouTube and has been binge watching. He is absolutely, completely excited, and he wants to start translating my some of my books into Afrikaans. I think I did report that on here, but not, I mean, it's a little bit worth repeating because that's kind of exciting. At least to me, it is. And things like that continue to happen. One of the interesting things, I think that you tried to participate in it. There is a Church of Christ called the Wilson Road Church of Christ. They have a call-in program, and they invite people to call in, and they say, if you've got any question whatsoever, just call in, ask any Bible question that you want to. We will be more than happy to answer your questions. Well, they started doing a series on covenant eschatology, full preterism, and yesterday, it's my understanding, that an entire group of preterist ministers, and I never knew if you were trying to participate in that or not. William, were you?
I was. Was that yesterday or Sunday?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. It was Sunday. Yes. But anyway, I got to read some of the feeds. I was actually out of pocket. I didn't even get a chance to try to call in. But I was visiting with Holger Neubauer about it. And about all of the men that tried to call in, were you ever able to call in?
I was not able to get in, and I was like just just like, what do you call it, just punch dialing. Every time my phone would hang up, I'd redial.
Wow. Well, it's absolutely remarkable, but Holger evidently got on, and it was just one machine gun question after another to him. They were not, and they would not even allow him. They wouldn't even allow him to ask a question. When he tried to ask a question, they just told him, "This is our program. It's not yours. You're not allowed to ask questions." Now, mind you, folks, this is a program that says if you have any Bible question, feel free to call and ask your question. We're not afraid of questions. But when Holger knew about questions, they told him he had no right to ask questions on their program. And several men have tried posting comments on their website, and their posts are deleted almost immediately. So that tells you an awful lot about what's going on with this Wilson Road Church of Christ. They tout themselves as the teachers and defenders of truth, and yet they will not even take phone calls, and they will not allow questions if a preterist does get in. And so it's actually pretty dishonorable type of conduct. You know, it would be one thing if the preterist men were calling and being vile and ugly and disrespectful and not showing Christian decorum. But to simply refuse to allow them to ask questions and then to just machine gun one question after another, never even allowing Holger to answer one question before they have already asked 3 or 4 more questions. Well, that's pretty dishonorable type of conduct. It's and so it's very, very revealing. Now, to shift gears just a little bit.
Well, before
William,
you shift gears.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you shift gears, about a year or more ago, I called them and challenged them to a debate on their radio broadcast. And initially, they contacted me back. But then when they found out who I was, they basically took the position, well, you've been disfellowshipped, so we're not going to talk to you. As a matter of fact, they didn't even attempt to call me back. So wow. That's their stance from that perspective. That was over a year ago. So I wasn't even aware at the time when everybody was asking about that particular congregation. I didn't know what their name was. But as soon as I heard the broadcast, I knew, because I think one of the guys' name is Henry, if I remember correctly. But they didn't want any part of it, so there you go.
Well, I'm not at all surprised. That side of the aisle, to use that terminology, they really, really like to brag and to boast about their debate prowess. And you know very good and well, William, you and I have talked about this on many, many occasions. If we were of a faith-only group, the Baptists, Presbyterians or whatever, and we were challenging them to debate faith only, they would be fighting each other for the opportunity to debate us. And
That's
if
right.
we were dispensationalists and we called in and said we wanted to debate them on dispensationalism, once again, they'd be fighting each other to determine who would debate us. But all of a sudden, when it comes to covenant eschatology, they told one of the men, I've forgotten who it was, but they told him that they weren't going to debate us because they didn't want to give us a forum. Now, that will sound familiar to you when we went to Creed Hardeman some years ago, and Gary Workman, who has challenged one denominational minister after another to debate, and they've told him, we don't want to give you a forum, and boy, he has blasted them. I mean, just blasted them. They're cowards, they're ungodly, they know they can't stand up and debate, but he made that identical excuse for not debating me. And now these brethren are doing the exact same thing. They told, I don't remember exactly whether it was Steve Basin or Roy Runyon or who it was, but they told them they're not going to give us a forum, and yet the one who said that has complained on air, or has actually had a debate with the Hebrew Israelite people. So here they would have a debate with the Hebrew Israelite people, giving them a forum, but they will not debate preterists because they don't want to give us a forum. Now, if you want to see the utter hypocrisy of something, then right there it is on full, open, glaring display. Now, speaking of debates, folks, William Vincent, who is kind of an outspoken critic of covenant eschatology on Facebook, he describes himself as a full-time researcher, professional researcher, and he claims that he was at one time a full preterist, and yet now he's not a full preterist, and he is anti-preterist. Well, several days ago, Mr. Vincent posted a challenge on a Facebook page that said, Matthew 16:27 is not the second coming, and if Don Preston would like to have a debate on this issue, let's do it. Well, I responded immediately upon seeing the challenge and said, I'm your man, let's do it, let's get it set up. And so, William, I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this yet, but on March the 10th, which will be 3 weeks or so away, however that long, no, it's a full month, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, on March the 10th, here on Fulfilled Radio, Two Guys in a Bible, we're going to have a formal 2-hour debate. William Bell will be the moderator. I volunteered you, William. And
that date's not going to work for me, Don. That date's not going to work.
Uh-oh. Okay. Oh, my goodness. Is that when you're in Ghana again?
Yes.
Okay.
Until
well, he can.
So.
Okay, he can't. He cannot do it before then. So I'll get back with him. Why don't you send me a text or an email with the date that when you'll be back and able to do that?
All right.
And I'll get with him, and we will reschedule that. But anyway, just so everyone knows, William Vincent and I have an agreement to debate the issue of whether or not Matthew 16:27, 28 is predictive of the second coming of Christ. And then there are two other developments that have just taken place over the last several days. I was contacted by a fellow who asked me if I would be willing to debate a historicist. Now, of course, historicism and amillennialism are first cousins. They're just almost identical. William and I were both raised as amillennialists in the Churches of Christ, and in some forms of the Church of Christ amillennialism, there's no distinction between historicism. And anyway, I responded to this fellow who contacted me via email, and I said, well, if you have a historist that is reputable, that is representative, and that is respectful, I said I would certainly consider having a debate with him. And within just a matter of hours, he wrote back and told me that he had a man by the name of Robert Carangola. Well, I'd actually heard the name. Mr. Carangola has written a couple of books defending the historicist's view and got a website, all this kind of stuff like that. He is evidently considered a very reputable man within their circles, and he has agreed. He and I have corresponded today, as a matter of fact. We are it's going to take us a little bit of time to work out the details, but at this particular moment, things can change. But at this particular moment, it looks like we may be able to work out to have a formal public debate in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then immediately, a couple of days after Gary DeMar debated Kent Hovind, I had a gentleman contact me and said, would you be willing to debate Mr. Hovind? And I said, well, from everything I know of him, I mean, he has earned his Ph.D. He has been incarcerated in the past, convicted of perjury, but he has nonetheless evidently turned his life around, and he is a very, very strong advocate of the pre-tribulation wrath concept of dispensationalism. And I said, yeah, I'd be willing to debate him. So this guy contacted Mr. Hovind and asked him if he would be willing to debate me. And Mr. Hovind said, yes, I think that's a great idea. And so it's on my docket, on my agenda, pardon me, to try to contact Mr. Hovind tomorrow. Again, I've already contacted Mr. Carangola. I'm going to have to find a way to keep these debates straight, William, if they all come through. But, I mean, that's kind of exciting that you have two notable and reputable men from the futurist camp who are seemingly, at least, willing to step forward and to defend their views against covenant eschatology. And that gives us the opportunity to get our message in front of audiences. And I think you know as well as I do that the only reason that this is happening is because covenant eschatology is spreading everywhere. They are becoming increasingly more and more aware of the growth of covenant eschatology, and they really feel like they have to do something about it. So I just find it very interesting that within literally within a matter of days of each other, I had two different men from the futurist camp, two different perspectives of the futurist camp, agree to have a public debate with me.
That's pretty good. That's great. And you're right. It is because the concepts are spreading, and they're not just spreading here, but they're spreading around the world. And that's exciting. It shows that, all the people who claim that it's just dying out, they're in a fantasy land. And, in time, this will be catching on like wildfire because it's a very exciting message. It's a very positive message. And it's one that really helps people to understand the Bible in ways that they never would. And, I heard from a guy who had called about a month well, actually, he called about a week ago, and but he had spoken. We had spoken about a year ago, and he's a member of the Church of Christ. But he said, man, he said, this thing is turning me upside down. He says, there's just no possible way that, what these brethren are saying can be true. And I'm just finding more and more. And so he wanted to know if I could, if I could study with him occasionally and that he could call me, et cetera. I told him, feel free to do so. And so that's good. And I'm also excited about a young man that I hope to meet in a couple of weeks or so when I go back to Ghana, who is, I mentioned him a little bit. He's a young guy, but he's getting ready to go to university, and he's been kicked out of his church and almost out of his family for his views on covenant eschatology. He, had been studying about 3 months and is very, very insightful and with it. And he, along with Solomon Baidu, have been working together and talking to some other gentlemen over there. And so we're supposed to get together when I go over there again and sit down and study with a few other preachers. And some of them are Assembly of God, et cetera, and I've spoken with them. So we're looking forward to some good things with them. They're very aggressive, or I should say assertive, in what they're doing, and they're really confronting some people over there. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. It certainly is. Well, I've been hearing from more and more people, you're sometimes reluctant to respond to an awful lot of correspondence from overseas. I am particularly reticent to engage in a lot of correspondence with people from Nigeria, for instance. I mean, I apologize for that, but I've been bitten more than once. Had more than one bad experience, but I've been contacted over the last couple of months by a gentleman. He has sent me pictures of the group that he is with. He claims that he has been watching my YouTube videos. He is aware of you very much and aware of our mutual ministries. And he, now, like most people, unfortunately, from Africa, India, what have you, he's been asking for Bibles. He has not asked for money. He's been asking for Bibles or for a portable microphone setup so that he can go and preach. It's difficult to know whether or not to support individuals like that. This fellow certainly seems a cut above, and so I've been contemplating trying to see if perhaps I could buy a few Bibles for him to distribute, because he tells me about the studies that he's having, the places that he's visiting, the fellowships that he is establishing, and what have you. And he's been going into some of the colleges and universities. I believe it's around Lagos, the capital there of Nigeria. And, of course, he's been encountering a tremendous amount of resistance. But nonetheless, he has really been active if he is to be believed. William, can you hear me okay?
Very well.
Okay, well, the reason I ask is because I just had a pop-up message on my computer that said I have a very poor connection, so I didn't know if I was actually coming through or not. So that's good to know. All right, folks. Well, I want to get back into our study of the Messianic Temple, and I think we spent enough time on Isaiah chapter 65. So we'll go now into Isaiah chapter 66. Just like Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66 is a passage that is alluded to, quoted, cited, echoed in many, many different ways in the New Testament by the New Testament writers. It's quoted in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. It is quoted in Acts chapter 7, and that's just a couple of passages that come to me right off the top of my head. And the motifs that are there, for instance, of the woman in childbearing, that's found in Romans 8. And so Isaiah chapter 66 is a very, very significant passage, not only in the overall story of eschatology, but it is particularly relevant for our study of the Messianic Temple. Notice Isaiah 66, verse 1. Thus says the Lord, the heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you will build unto me? Where is the place of my rest? Now, this passage was a direct challenge to the mentality, to the thinking of the ancient Jews who put so much emphasis on the physical edifice of the Jerusalem temple. I mean, let's face it now. Let's try to be realistic. The Lord said all the way back in Deuteronomy chapter 12 that the time was going to come, and of course, when he spoke this, he was the children of Israel were in the Exodus. But the Lord said the time was going to come in which he would pick a place, he would choose a location, and when he did, that would be the place and the only place where sacrifices could be offered to him. That place would be special to his name. That place would be where he would dwell among his people. And so the Jews down through history, when Solomon built his magnificent temple, the Jews placed all of their hopes on that Jerusalem temple as being the focus of God's presence, the very sign and very symbol of God's covenant with Israel and dwelling among them. And down through the period of time, they were absolutely devastated. I mean, beyond imagination, when Solomon's temple was destroyed in 586 BC, when you read some of the rabbinic comments about that destruction and the trauma that it induced in the nation of Israel, it's really honestly difficult for us today, living in America, living in a society in which temples really don't play a part for us. They are not the center of our world. They're certainly not the focus of our worship in the great majority of what we call Christianity today. I mean, we've got some exceptions to that. You have the Mormons with their temple in Salt Lake City, which is an incredible edifice. I've been there. I've seen it. It's gorgeous. I absolutely hate what it stands for and what it represents. And yet, even with that beautiful temple, insofar as the physical edifice is concerned, by and large, as Americans, as Westerners, this is true in South America. This is true in many, many places around the world. We're no longer, to coin a term, temple-centric. We just cannot imagine the trauma that the destruction of the temple in 586 BC caused in the Jewish psyche. And so, when we come to passages like Isaiah 66, and here the Lord is speaking to the people, and he's telling them the physical temple, he's basically challenging them. He's saying to them, prove to me that a physical temple is all that important. He said, heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. So where's the house that you're going to build for me? Where's the house that you're going to make that will even compare with my real temple, my throne? And so, all the way back in the days of Isaiah, God was trying to challenge the Jewish mentality to make them realize that physical temples were not the focus of his worship and service. Pardon me. Now, it's interesting to me, William. Back when the Israelites, before they ever conquered Jerusalem, they had the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Covenant kind of moved here and it moved there. It went to Kirjath Jearim, and it stayed there. And evidently, according to the record, anybody at all could go there and worship. It's an absolutely fascinating account. And it makes you think, it makes you wonder if God wasn't doing that on purpose to try to prevent the Israelites from saying, oh, the temple, God can only be dwelling in one particular place. Well, he dwelt here and he dwelt there. He moved the ark. They moved the Ark of the Covenant over here. They moved it over there, and God was still with them. And in addition to that, in Ezekiel chapter 10, just immediately prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, in Ezekiel chapter 10, we are told that Ezekiel witnessed the Shekinah glory cloud departing from the temple, going over to the Mount of Olives, sitting there for a brief time, and then ascending to heaven. All of which is really highly, highly suggestive, by the way. But nonetheless, the Lord said to Israel at that time that although the Shekinah glory cloud had departed, although he was no longer in the temple, and even though they were going to be scattered among the nations, and over and over again, in the book of Ezekiel particularly, you find that term, among the nations, among all the nations. That was Israel's fate. Just like the 10 northern tribes were swallowed up by the nations, the 2 southern tribes were swallowed up by the nations. And yet the Lord said in Ezekiel chapter 10 that as they were scattered among all the nations, now remember, their scattering meant the temple had been destroyed. So they no longer have the temple that they can adore. They can no longer, it doesn't do them any good to make the 3 pilgrimages a year to go back to Jerusalem there to offer their sacrifice, because there's no altar. There's no priesthood functioning in Jerusalem. But the Lord said, even though I will carry you and disperse you among all of the nations, yet there, that is, among all the nations, I will be to you a little tabernacle, a little sanctuary. I mean, that should have sent a really, really, really powerful lesson to Israel that God doesn't need temples. He doesn't need buildings to dwell in, because buildings cannot hold him. Kind of like Jeremiah 23. Do not I fill heaven and earth, says the Lord? Well, it's obviously a rhetorical question. Obviously, he does fill heaven and earth. And therefore, the idea that they could restrict God to a literal physical temple in the land of Israel was absolutely ridiculous. That message was being driven home in a powerful, powerful way. Look, Solomon understood this. When he was dedicating his magnificent temple in 2 Kings chapter 7 and 8, Solomon stood there with the thronging masses who were there to adore, to admire, to appreciate this wonderful, wonderful building that was now complete, overlaid with gold. It's got silver, it's got cedar, it's got white marble. I mean, it must have been a sight to behold, truly. And yet here Solomon stands out, and he lifts his hands and he prays to the Lord, and he just says, "Oh Lord, what nation is there that has a God like you? What nation is there that serves a God like you?" And this building is not able to hold the God of heaven and earth. And so, I mean, it's more than remarkable that all down through Israel's history, we have instances in which God's spokesman just say concerning the beautiful temple that they dwelt at, that they would just say, this building cannot hold you. You are too great to dwell even in this splendid temple. And yet, we come to the New Testament, to the first century period of time, and we see over and over and over again of how the Jews had basically idolized the temple. I mean, they were at the point of when they would offer a vow, they would offer a vow to the temple itself, or they would offer a vow based upon the altar, based upon the priesthood. And Jesus chided them for that, for swearing oaths. I swear by the altar, I swear by the temple, I swear by the foundation of the temple. Because that to them, in their mind, was the greatest thing that they had. Now, keep in mind, the Jews were taught in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, 1-5, not to be going about offering oaths, But if they made an oath, they had to keep it. But they were supposed to be extremely circumspect in regard to making an oath, to swearing by this or by that or the other. But boy, in Jesus' day, the temple had become so central to their thought, so central to their world, that they had now begun swearing oaths to or by the altar, the foundation, the temple itself, the priesthood, the sacrifices, or whatever it might be, and Jesus castigated them for that. And we can't forget, on 2 different occasions, Jesus went into the temple, and there he ran out the money changers. And he said, this house is to be a house of prayer for all of the nations. You have turned this house into a den of thieves, of robbers and thieves. And so, when we look at Isaiah 66, and especially when we look at the modern day dispensational view and emphasis on the physical temple, William, has it ever struck you in your thinking, cogitations, and meditations, has it ever struck you that the modern-day dispensationalists are ever been as guilty of idolizing the concept of a Jerusalem temple as the ancient Jews did?
Well, obviously so. I mean, they write books on it. They dedicate hours and hours of time talking about it. They arrange trips and everything to continue to reinforce that concept into the minds of people. So, yeah, they are definitely wedded to the idea and the concept to the point that it receives a high priority of their focus and their time in terms of, the position that they place the temple in their in their theology and in their teaching.
Right. I just wonder, I have wondered about this before. I've wondered how many dispensational books have actually been written on the idea that the temple has to be rebuilt. I mean, goodness gracious, there have been tons of books written by dispensational writers claiming that we're on the verge. Look, I remember when I was in high school. Never will forget this. It struck me, I must confess, it struck me as ludicrous. I literally laughed at it. I know people take it seriously. I'm not trying to laugh at the people who are very sincere about it. But I remember as a teenager, in 67, 68, it seems to me, that when I heard the news, I literally laughed, and I said, how could anybody be so foolish? And what it was, the local newspaper, as I remember it, carried an article about a guy in Wisconsin, up in the north, that had dedicated himself to breeding red cattle for the express purpose of breeding a red heifer, with the view that there had to be a red heifer, a pure red heifer, no white hairs, no gray hairs, no black hairs, pure red heifer that could be offered as a sacrifice, whose ashes could then be used to dedicate the temple that was supposedly just getting ready to be rebuilt. Now, let me remind everyone, this was in the late 60s, mid to late 60s. And this article and the news that I was hearing and reading at the time was talking about there was supposedly, and I use that word supposedly. I mean, I remember the story. I don't remember the minute details, but I do remember the broad outline of the details, or the broad outline of the story. There was supposedly a humongous freight train up in Wisconsin that was already loaded down with building materials that was going to be taken to one of the West Coast, whichever one that would be. I guess that would be the West Coast. And it was going to be shipped to Israel for the building of the Jerusalem temple. Okay, that was in the 60s. Now here we are in the 2020. So that's been a long time ago. Now, I don't know if the boat sank. I do know this, folks. I do know that some red heifers have made the news several different times. The stories of red heifers being bred and headlines heralding, we have a red heifer. The end is near. And I have some articles, by the way, on my website, donkpreston.com. I have some articles that I wrote at the different times based upon the news releases that were given at different times, sometimes 5 years apart, 10, whatever, and the stories and the claims that were being made about about a red heifer being bred. And invariably, every single red heifer that has been touted, and oh, by the way, there are now at least 2 or 3 farms, if I've heard correctly, there are now 2 or 3 farms dedicated to breeding red heifers to, cattle to produce a qualified red heifer. So all of this shows you the absolute, I guess paranoia is not the right word, but the phantasmagoric interest. Yeah, fanaticism. That's a great word. That surrounds this entire doctrine of, and in literal truth, it's not even the Messianic temple. Because let me remind our listeners, okay, this is critically important to remember. In the dispensational paradigm, you have the rapture. The church is removed from the earth. God begins to deal once again with Israel only. Well, the interesting thing about this is, even though God is supposedly dealing with Israel, it's the man of sin that steps forward. What irony this is, that steps forward and makes a covenant of peace between Israel and the nations that allows Israel to rebuild the Jerusalem temple. So pay very close attention to this, folks. The Jerusalem temple that the man of sin allows and provides for Israel to rebuild is not, let me repeat, is not the Messianic temple. But they ostensibly build that temple. Now, I understand there's all sorts of differences in technology and what have you, but it's rather remarkable to me that the idea is that the Jews would rebuild a temple in Jerusalem ostensibly to match that of Herod's temple, and they will do it in less than 3.5 years. And the reason I say less than 3.5 years is because they get it completed and they start offering sacrifices there again. And as Thomas Ice expresses it in his book Prophetic Watch, he says they begin offering traditional Jewish sacrifices. So they obviously finish it before the 3.5 years. Well, William, how long did it take Herod to build the Jerusalem temple that stood in Jesus' day?
Well, according to John chapter 2, they said 40 and 6 years was this temple in building. And that was at the time that Christ was on earth. And of course, as far as I understand it, that temple wasn't finished until up to the time of its destruction. So that was quite a few years when you think about it. And that was, primarily the embellishments that were done by Herod.
Yeah, I mean, you think about that, 46 years. And according to Josephus, the actual construction was completed in approximately 64 A.D. If I remember that date correctly. So you add from Jesus' day, and in Jesus' day it had already been under construction for 46 years. And by the way, Josephus tells us there were 10,000 men working on that temple day and night, basically, nonstop, working 46 years at the time Jesus said what he did in John chapter 2, verse 46. And then you add another 34 years to that. My goodness gracious, that's over 70 years of construction. Now, again, I understand we got better technology, we got big cranes, and we got bulldozers, and we've got this, and we've got that. But it strikes me as just a little bit, it strikes me as a whole lot remarkable to think that it could be imagined that the Jerusalem temple I'll call it the Man of Sin temple because that's really honestly what it would be. But I find it absolutely remarkable that the Man of Sin temple could be completely constructed, in 3.5 years when it took over 70 years to build the temple of the first century. Now, once again, the point being this: if in fact they've been gathering all, and they are, there's no question about it. You have the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. They're supposedly training priests. Now, they don't have any genealogies to confirm who they are, but they're supposedly training these priests to serve in the temple, and they're still looking for the red heifer, by the way. They don't have a red heifer, but they supposedly have all of this material laid aside for the rebuilding of the temple. So it kind of makes you wonder, okay, if you got all this material laid aside, are they not going to use that? Are they going to use all brand new materials for the temple of the Man of Sin? I mean, after all, why would you want to go to the extra expense of gathering all new materials if you got all your stuff on hand? So I just see tremendous logistical problems with the modern day scenario.
Well, no doubt about it.
All right.
Yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to send my wife a text. For some reason my television decided to come on, and I can hear it in the background. I don't know if anyone else can hear it, but I can certainly hear it where I'm at. And so while I was trying to talk there at the very last, I was trying to text my wife to come turn the TV off because it just popped on and the sound was coming through for me. Sorry about that, folks. We've got these really, really super duper fancy radio studios to do this, right? William's in his office. I'm sitting at the table in the dining room, and but we have all these distractions from time to time. But that's the way it is. But that's also the wonder of the internet. We don't have to have some kind of phantasmagoric, type of studio in order to be able to have access to the world. Okay, William, you want to offer any other comments there on Isaiah 66:1? And because we haven't yet gone to the New Testament on this, so maybe you could offer us some insight on how Stephen, standing in the temple in Acts chapter 6 and 7, delivered one of the greatest sermons that has ever been given. And he quotes this text verbatim.
Oh, yes. Very powerful sermon indeed in Acts chapter 7. As a matter of fact, so powerful that it became his last one.
Yeah.
I guess we have yet to preach our most powerful one at this point. But it certainly was. And that text just, it just rings out in that particular message that Stephen gave. And it's a passage that I, often quote, and I think it's so appropriate when you're talking to people about the temple and to help them to see it and the correlations between the temple and the kingdom, the resurrection, etc., is quite a major point to make and to hear and say, the Most High does not dwell in temples made with men's hands. And what's impressive to me about that text is the first time the concept of not made with hands is mentioned, at least, I won't say the first time, but I think one of the first, if it's not the first, is Daniel 2. And it's directly speaking of the kingdom. And, people don't have a problem for the most part, unless they are dispensational for, understanding that the kingdom is spiritual. At least the people from our background circles, the amillennial background and, Church of Christ background, they get that. They understand the kingdom is not made with hands, that it's not of this world, etc. But they don't seem to get the fact that the kingdom and the temple are the same, and that is also the house not made with hands in the book of Corinthians, and 2 Corinthians particularly, but it's 1 Corinthians as well. And to get that concept and that idea all wrapped into one and seeing the importance and the power of what Stephen was saying to them would just be revolutionary in terms of their understanding. And so I think it's just a powerful text. He, as you say, cites Isaiah 66 verbatim and talks about that. And it is after he says that he, it seems like the whole tone and tenor of the audience changed. I'm sure you've had the experience of teaching a lesson, and the lesson had so much, you might say, power and challenge to it, that there's a point in time in the lesson where you notice a total different reaction on the part of the audience. They're going along with you up to a point, and then you say one thing or make one particular argument or concept, and then all of a sudden it's a total different ball game. It's like, you're wondering, is there a very convenient exit for you to get out of the building when you're done? But that's kind of what happened after he makes this statement. The whole tone and of the audience changes, and then his message begins to change because he then starts to leave off that message and address them particularly in terms of what he saw on their faces and in their attitudes and demeanor in terms of how they were receiving the message, and which was not very pleasant at all. So, and it's not well received even today when we start to talk about the house not made with hands and correlating that with the temple, and people just don't seem to get it, and they reject it, and some of them vehemently reject it.
I think it's interesting, and the points you make there are so very, very valid. So many people understand that terminology of not made with hands. I mean, when you look at Hebrews chapter 8, in which the writer says this is the summary of everything that we have said. We have a high priest who has entered into the heavens and serves there in the true tabernacle, the one pitched by God and not man. And everyone understands that's the spiritual temple. Everybody understands that's not a literal temple of any kind, and yet he calls it the true temple. And yet it's absolutely amazing to me that our dispensational friends will say, well, that's true for now, but in the future we're going to have a literal temple. Well, if it's a literal physical temple, then it's not the true tabernacle, because the church, the body of Christ, is the true temple / tabernacle. But anyway, this whole concept of not made with hands, the antithesis of that is made with hands. And there's a book written by an author by the name of Timothy Gray, Jesus in the Temple, I believe. I've forgotten the name of the title. If anyone wishes the name of that book, specifically the title of it, contact me and I'll be glad to get it for you. But Timothy Gray makes the observation, and he documents it very, very well, that throughout Scripture, and especially in the Old Testament, the term made with hands refers almost invariably to idolatry. And so the antithesis of that, when the New Testament writers are talking about the temple of God not made with hands, when he's talking about the circumcision of the heart not made with hands, when he's talking about the true tabernacle not made with hands, and I believe, what is it, William, something like 7 times that term not made with hands appears in the New Testament. So here on the one hand, you have if not more. But anyway, in the Old Testament, you have this terminology of made with hands, almost invariably referring to idolatry. And then in the New Testament, you have the absolute antithesis of that, which sprang from Daniel chapter 2, predicting that the time was going to come in which there was a small stone cut out of the mountain. But it was a stone not made with hands. And it's a kingdom not made with hands. So it's not an idolatrous kingdom. It's not a man-made kingdom. It is a kingdom established by God himself. And so, again, when we come to the New Testament and we see all of these terms of not made with hands, then we can know that we're in the territory of discussion, insofar as the Bible is concerned, of the things of man versus the things of God. We are talking about the things of man, alienated from God, often in rebellion against God. We are talking about man, if I can use the terminology, in the flesh, versus man walking in harmony as the pneumatikos man, the spiritual man of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And so these are all very, very powerful concepts to be considered in light of Isaiah chapter 66 and Stephen's statement there in Acts 7:48. The Most High does not dwell in temples made with hands. Everything that they believed, everything that they stood for. Now let's remember, all throughout the Old Testament, when the Lord said, I'm going to put my name here, that's where I'll dwell with you. I will dwell in your midst. I'll be your God, and you shall be my people. Those were just statements that they held to, they believed, that they just felt like was the center of their world. And yet now here, Stephen tells them, listen, guys, I know I'm standing in the temple that you think is the residence of God. I'm telling you right now. And he could have said, don't you remember that Solomon, our king, said, where the heaven of heavens cannot control you, the earth and all that is in them cannot hold you. How then can I build a building and a house to contain you? Very, very powerful stuff. And it looks like we're out of time, folks. I want to thank you for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. William, always great to be with you. And with that, I'm going to say good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.